Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with yet another in our long-running series about the example projects that are supplied with Oracle Policy Modeling. Now, the policy model we're going to talk about this time is called MyBenefits and is probably one of the best known because, well, it's been around for a while. In fact, I think it's been around even before version 12. And also, it's one of the most rounded in the sense that it has a great deal of information that will be useful for anyone who's learning Oracle Intelligent Advisor or who is looking at ways of structuring projects or just looking for good examples of how to build a reasonably a reasonably complex project. Complex not in the sense of the rules. I don't think the rules are particularly complicated, but complex in the sense of that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of material in here. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, as ever, the best way to find out is to go to the project tab and go to example projects and scroll down until you reach, in this case, MyBenefits. So designed for online self-service use, determines household members' eligibility for a range of social services and allows them to generate a pre-filled claim form. So already from that, we know that there's going to be a generated PDF file. In fact, there are two, and we'll talk about that in just a second. When we look at the key features, you'll see that Excel features heavily, and that's because there's a lot of tabular data. And as we'll see, there's a really neat trick that they're using called apply sheet, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's lots of different kinds of rules, procedural rules, system rules, as well as obviously the actual business rules. The interview has been tweaked to have better layouts using side-by-side layouts. It also has value lists, test cases. They pretty much throw in the kitchen sink at this example, and I think it's a very, very good one. What I would say is that if you're not involved in social services or government, give this project a chance anyway. Don't just assume because it's nothing to do. Maybe you work in telco, maybe you work in financial services. I have no idea, and you're thinking nothing to do with me. Well, actually, I disagree because I think this particular project is so rich and so well-rounded that everybody can learn something from it. So let's see what it looks like in the flesh, if you will. So I'm just going to fire it up in the debugger, and we'll obviously this will give us a chance to talk about the structure of the project before we look at the rules and then the different items. So as you can see, it's a customized interview. So they've gone into the styling of the interview. I'm sure you guys already know this, but they've gone into the interview tab. They've gone into styles and they've set up custom header. They've set up custom styles. They've changed a little bit of the way the information is displayed. And it's a latest version project like all of these demos usually are. So as well as that, if I switch back to the debugger, we can see that it has a list of states. So this is entirely US based, but again, don't let that put you off because it's just a drop-down list of places. And as I was mentioning before, this is a good example of using a value list. So this value list contains the list of all of the states and other dependent territories of the United States of America. And because it shows up in about 4 or 5 different places, it's a wonderful choice to use a value list, which can of course then be reused across many different attributes in the project, and even can be exported from this project and used somewhere else. So if you're about to start a project that has all of those states and dependent territories in a list, come here, export the value list, and go use it in your own project. I mean, that might save you 15 minutes anyway, or probably longer actually. So you choose your state. So I'm going to go for California, and we have some custom labels here with links, and off we go. So I'm going to fill in my details, and I'll put in my real age, and I'll say for this that I'm a US citizen and I am not permanently disabled or blind. And as you can see, we now reach an entity collect. So these are the different people in my household, and we'll again fill that all in. You'll notice that the styling is slightly modified, so we have a white and a gray background instead of the blue background. Again, this is all coming from the styles option inside here, so they've modified the way the entity collect is displayed, and they've also changed the button to be, well, they've actually just restyled the button a little bit. So this just remove that for now and move on to the next page. Are we receiving supplementary security income? No. And then we come to the page where we build out all of our resources. Whenever you're working with social services or benefits, ultimately it tends to come down to 3 or 4 key ideas. The first is the makeup of your household, which is what we just talked about, the other people in your home. And then we talk about the income and resources and your particular situation. So whether you have money on hand, whether you have a job, whether your situation has recently changed, and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill out a little bit of information here and move on. And say I don't require childcare, and see what expenses we have. Is there anyone in this household who's pregnant? No. And anyone who has issues with. And so now we come to essentially the summary page, where we have a variety of explanations explaining why we may be eligible for the Supplementary Nutritional Assistance Program or any of the other benefits or social services that are listed in this project. As you can see, there's actually quite a lot of different social services that are referenced in this project, and each of them has their own explanation. In a sense, what they've done is, if we go back into the interview and click goals, they have a synthetic goal here called the interview is complete, but they are focusing in terms of explanations on the actual tangible goals. That is, the different kinds of social service that are being proposed in the interview. So rather than just showing you the global goal and telling you the interview is complete, they're actually focusing on the intermediate or lower level goals, because they're the ones that actually have a meaning for the customer. And you might have noticed, incidentally, that while we were doing this, if we scroll on, we can go to the next page, and it asks for my contact details. And I'll just type in, and we'll put in San Mateo. And we don't have a different mailing address and so on. And we have a application form. You might have noticed on the left hand side that this application form, we actually skipped a page here called the authorization page, and that's because there are 2 ways of handling this benefits program from the point of view of the end user. If you go and have a look at the project tab and go and have a look at forms, you'll see there are 2 forms provided, one of which is an RTF, so the traditional Oracle BI Analytics desktop RTF template. The other one is the PDF template instead. The difference being is that the PDF doesn't support signatures. So if you are using the interview in its standard out of the box mechanism way, you'll find that it skips over this page, but somebody's very kindly left an instruction here that if you want to use this, make sure you set the visibility of the screen to show if always. So you can go and find that screen. Here it is, the application, sorry, it's the authorization screen, and say show if always as opposed to show if relevant. And then we'll go ahead and we'll come back into the interview, and we can see now that the authorization page is available. It's no longer grayed out. So, and there we go, and I'll sign my name. And of course, if we would click on this, we would still get the PDF. So you would need to remember to go to the application form page and add a new control of type form so that people can download the alternative version, which is the RTF template, including signature. There we go. And we'll pump up the volume and put it back in the debug. So now I should be able to download it, and I should hopefully, assuming I haven't reinitialized the debugger, actually see my signature in the PDF file once it shows up. There we go. This one takes a little while because it's got quite a lot to it. There we are, nicely styled out Oracle BI, Oracle Analytics BI Publisher desktop, whatever it's called now, with some really nice formatting and some really nice layout. You can see that was the other person in my household. I really think that they've gone to town and made this a very, very clean and pretty PDF file complete with my signature. You'll recall, if you're a regular reader of the website, that we've actually been dealing with signatures very recently. And that's one of the things we'll talk about when we talk about what you could use to customize this. So now that we've given ourselves a kind of run through of what it does, let's take a few other items out of this that we really think you should learn from. So the data model itself is pretty simple. We only have the idea of a household member. We have a whole bunch of attributes. There's some really nice features here that I don't even know if they meant to do this, but it's really cool that here, when you look at the household member, if you look at the role column, you have just about every role that's ever going to show up in Oracle policy modeling. So, if I look at global, I can see, for example, here that I have at least one goal. There we go. We know that the goal in terms of logic is kind of like the top of the tree. It's the thing that we're here for, or one of the things we're here for. So the interview complete is a kind of synthetic goal that says it's complete if we've done whatever we were supposed to do for every one of the household members. Then we have the input attributes. So they're the bottom of the tree. If you think of it as they're the kind of core base data that we need to enter, like my details, my resources, the other people in my household, and so on. And then we have the other role types, such as intermediate attributes. An intermediate attribute, if you didn't already know it, is something that is both a conclusion and also is a condition. So if you're thinking this is a tree, they can be a kind of conclusion somewhere in the middle, and they can also feed into conclusions above them. So they're intermediate. And then we have joining role, which means basically that this attribute is split over more than one document. So if I right-click this, you can see that this one is actually referenced in two different documents. It's a conclusion in one and a condition in the other, but the joining role typically just means that it's over multiple documents. And we can also see that we have top role, which means that this is derived from a table or a Boolean. Let's see if we can find a good example. So it's a kind of a separate tree all in its own. If we go and find it, there we go. Yeah, there's a good example. So the poverty guideline annual for a household of one is derived as a conclusion out of an Excel spreadsheet, and it gets the top role. So those are about 9/10 of the roles you'll ever come across in an Oracle policy modeling project. So that's a good exercise in itself. We talked about the household member entity just a moment ago, that this is the thing that makes this work. Basically, you, your partner, your children, whoever else is staying in your house, your household, if you will. And when you right-click that, you'll notice that it's collected on that screen that I showed you. And it's also, there are a whole bunch of different function calls that use Oracle Intelligent Advisor functions to get things done that you and I are going to need to do in almost every halfway interesting project. A lot of instance count, like instant count if, count only the people who are qualifying dependents. Then we have just an instance count again. It's an instance count if, I beg your pardon, but it's written in long format. Then we have instance count if you have qualifying child. And then we have exists. So is there at least one of the following? And this is to do with children aged 18 years or younger. And then we've got instant count if again. Instance count straight up how many household members there are, which is the number of people in the household is you plus everybody else. And then we've got things like, let's see, instance count if again, exists again. So that's all looking for those scenarios. Is there at least one person who meets these criteria? That's what the exist function is all about. Is there at least one instance of a household member that meets those? But alternatively, you can have the opposite, which is for all, which says basically, does everybody in the household fit this model? And these are absolutely wonderfully simple examples of using entity functions, entity-based reasoning. Very cool. So, there's no better way to learn about for all, exist, instance count if, and all those other related functions than by looking at a project just like this. Still in the rules, we've got some really nice documents in here, and there's some really nice features that I want to show you if you've never seen them before. A good example would be, for example, here we have the state median income. And as you would expect, every state defines its median income differently. So when you look at this Excel spreadsheet, you'll find that you have a gazillion, 50 plus tabs in this spreadsheet detailing all the different information per state. And if I now go to the original page, here we go. Right at the top of the document, we have what is known as an apply sheet. So it's a mechanism whereby Oracle Intelligent Advisor doesn't have to look at all those sheets, because it's only going to look at one, because you're going to say, I live in a particular state. You may remember that just at the beginning of the interview, it said, where do you live? So in a sense, by choosing where you live with that value list, you're telling it, okay, apply this state to everything else. So we have state median income, and it will apply only the sheet that is relevant to you. So in my case, I chose California, so only this data would be relevant for me. All the other states may have, in fact, have different figures and different kinds of data. So it's a cool way of eliminating unnecessary processing. So apply sheet is a real win. If you don't use it, you should be. A couple of other things that are really interesting within these spreadsheets is if we go into the poverty guidelines, we don't see these very often, so it's worth mentioning them, that we have a lot of attributes in this project that are very, very long. The name, the text is very, very long. So here they're using legend keys, which are basically shortened versions. So instead of having to type this, the 100% of the monthly poverty level for the household size, into a column header or into a column in an Excel spreadsheet, all I have to do is use poverty level 100%. So if I go to one of these poverty level 100%, that's the same attribute. I can even prove it by going to go to, and I'll click go to, and it'll pop up with the long, reminding me this is this attribute. But it just means that your columns are a little bit smaller. You're not having to stretch left and right to find everything. So yeah, don't forget that you can use legends to kind of give yourself aliases of long attribute texts. What else do we want to show you? We want to show you a couple of other things within this project. I'm going to go into the procedural one here. And I got to say, I really like the way these documents have been done. They're really good examples of being organized, being clear, making sure you use the table of contents. Yeah, got to say, these are pretty cool. You've got some very good, simple to follow, but very relevant examples of using multiple conditions and multiple levels of conditions. So the interview is complete if, and then we have the yellow, which is level 1. And then we have an either, which introduces a either or aggregation, or a I can't remember whether it's an aggregation or a disjunction anyway. But then we have the sub. So we come down to level 2, which says both this and this or that. So this is level 1, level 2, level 3. Back to level 2, back to level 1, and then back to level 2, back to level 3. So this is, if you read through this or use the debugger to basically understand how this works. So we'll go into the debugger and look at it in the decision tab. It's really, really good for you to understand how that level of logic works. So it was the interview is complete if the applicant's details have been collected, and for all the household members, the details have been collected. Either, and then we have both the household may be eligible for SNAP. So in this case, the household may be eligible for SNAP, and the household estimate monthly allotment for SNAP is known. And the household estimated monthly allotment for SNAP is known, and we can see it's $347. So we followed this branch here, so we didn't need the or, and either, and then the household may be eligible for TANF. And indeed, this is now, it says the household may not be eligible for TANF. So we followed this branch instead, and so on and so on. So it can be a really good exercise of learning how to use the debugger and the decision tab, and also just reading something that is frankly super well laid out, super well written. Hats off to whoever did this. I think I know very well who did this demo, who built this project. So I got to say thank you to her. And we'll come down, and we have some very neatly done, and this is also worth mentioning. We've got level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So it's not often that you find yourself looking at an example that includes 4 of the 6 levels of conditions. So hats off for them for putting this together. You can see that even when it's complex, it's still easy to read. And the other reason I like this here is this rule here, the additional application form details have been collected, is built in a slightly different way to these ones. So this is kind of like the sort of usual way you would expect to see level 1, level 2, level 3, where you've got nested sets of conditions, and you've got keywords like either or both or guiding you through it. The reason I like this one at the end here is it uses the alternative method, where basically, if you look at level 1 here, it says the details required for the My Details section have been collected. So instead of using either or both or all or one of those aggregation techniques, this is actually built using the same condition levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, but this is actually an intermediate attribute. So the details required for the My Details sections have been collected. This is an attribute. So it's seen in a couple of example projects, but this is a Boolean, and this Boolean is proven if the underlying content is proven. So it's a slightly different way of writing a rule, but I quite like this as a demonstration. I think it's very good. So all of this basically rolls up as proof of that. And we'll come out of there. And the final one I want to show you is This document is full of links. So if you're looking for ideas for what you could do to bring it up to date, because it's not necessarily up to date, or you want to extend it a little bit further, as you can see, there's some assumptions that were made. You could use any of these reference points and go off and find more about them. Coming back to the interview itself, there are a couple of other things that I think are worth mentioning. If we go back to, let's find it now. There we go, pregnant. There is a household member who is pregnant. So obviously, I think we probably understand what we're getting at here. And if we go over to the file, there are a couple of reasons why I want to show this to you. So there is not a household member who is pregnant, just reminding us that, you can create what are known as shortcut rules. Again, we don't see these very often, but a common example that's given is that, if you have a rule that says you're authorized if you've lived here for 50 years, and then you have another rule that says, what about if the person's here for 20 years? Well, clearly, if you've been here for 50 years, there's a shortcut you can take. It's, well, you've been here for 20 years as well. Dig into shortcut rules. You don't see them very often, and I'm glad that they put one in here. There's a keyboard shortcut, if I remember rightly, which is F9, which I may be getting it wrong, but that builds keyboard shortcuts. It irritates me because it's also the spell check. You can probably tell from this screenshot here that a lot of these come from version 10. You'll see some occasional tags in here that clearly were originally from version 10, if you're familiar with the way version 10 used to mark up Word documents. So what else is there to see in this project? There is so much learning possibility here that we could go on for hours, but really one of the things I absolutely want you to take a look at is the test cases, because when you look at it you think, oh, he's only got 2 Excel spreadsheets in here for the test cases, but they really are extremely well thought out and, more importantly, extremely well presented from a learning perspective. So I'm going to go into the what if analysis, which in itself is a great reminder that these are not just about test cases. It could also be about imagining what would happen if. First of all, you can see that there are over 500 test cases in this file. So hats off for doing quite so many. You can see that they make excellent use of the keep columns. So you can see policy 1 and policy 2. So they're looking at what would happen if we change something. So we've got policy 1 and policy 2. And underneath, they've just done something very simple. They've made some charts so that we can compare the results, which after all is what if is all about. What if we did this to our policies? How would that impact our budget? How would that impact the people who are benefiting from our service? So absolutely top-notch Excel spreadsheet with hundreds of scenarios in it, and you can see dozens of scenarios for different household members. So it's not just the same thing running every single time. It's very good. And the other reason I like it, of course, is that with such heavy-duty and well thought out test cases, when we run them all, we can then remind ourselves that when you're running test cases like this, you will get obviously vital information for regression testing. So in this case, you can see that 3 test cases have failed. But the reason I want to talk about it at the moment is because, of course, within the process of generating those test case results, we also get the test performance file. So the test performance is a great way of identifying the most costly in terms of execution time of the relationships, of the rules, or whatever it is that, So it's a great way of understanding how the time is spent when your rules are executed. So I'll go in and get the data from the file, and we'll go and grab this file. So I'm absolutely not saying that this is something that is wrong with this project. Absolutely not. I'm not saying you need to worry about performance for any particular reason in this project, or indeed in any project. But it's always entertaining and interesting to see, in terms of microseconds or milliseconds, whatever you call it, what the time was spent on. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to sort column. Let's sort by column 1, largest to smallest. So if we just come past all of the sort of internal stuff like the total think time and the time it took to read the case and write the case at the end, so of the test cases, We've got the applicant's number of spouses, which took 22,000, not a great deal. And let's see, the point I'm trying to make is that in a real life scenario, this kind of information is very valuable over time. So you do this on a regular basis and you pull out this data and you can start to see maybe where some rules are costing you more in time, and perhaps that's because of something you did. This is great for identifying potential issues before you go any further. And it only makes sense to do it when you have a representative set of cases, and we have them right here in this project. I'm not going to save this. So what else do we want to talk about? Well, where can we go with this project? There's just so much that you could do to the project, but I'm going to sort of break it down into 5 points. So there were so many of these that I realized I actually had to write them down, otherwise I'd forget them. So the MyBenefits project, what I think are the things for you to do to boost your learning of Oracle Intelligent Advisor, or just to have a bit of fun. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier, is update some of the numbers, update some of the information used to seed those big tables. Those pieces of data have undoubtedly evolved. In a more serious note, and something that I encourage you to investigate either through the articles on our website or anywhere else like the online documentation, is to consider something like temporal reasoning. Because resources, in this project, you type in how much money you have per month. But that's assuming you have the same every month. In real life, when it comes to asking somebody, a citizen, about their resources, what you're basically saying is, show me your resources this month, last month, the month before that. And we know that those numbers could be different. Maybe you were employed 2 months ago, but now you're unemployed. So the ability to show over time that these are my resources, and also, of course, the household members. Well, you have a child who was under 18, who was a member of your household until September this month, and now is no longer going to be fiscally part of your household because they've gone to college. And in some countries, that's the way it works, is when the child becomes an adult or becomes, officially not a child and leaves the household physically, then they are no longer used in the calculation of benefits. So you need to think about, well, how do we capture that in the project to say, well, you were here this month, last month, and the previous month, but you're not here next month. Because a lot of sort of information, a lot of calculations tend to look at historical data. When you get a benefit, it's not about your situation right now. It could be also that we want to know where you were the last month and the previous month and the month before that. So household members and household situation. Are you a dependent adult? Are you a child? And again, does this evolve over time? Big stuff, and we've talked about temporal reasoning, and we do have a temporal reasoning course if you're interested in it. The third item is also we'd say modernity, is that in this project there are a lot of simple tables that probably could be better served as decision services. You'll recall that decision services are edited in the hub and are referenced in Oracle policy modeling through a mechanism called a service reference. So it's good if you need to outsource the management of a table. You don't need people poking around in Oracle policy modeling. You just send them to the hub and say, here's the table, go update it. The other reason that that's popular is because it doesn't require the project to be redeployed. The update is made at the time of execution because it goes and gets the information from the decision service. I mentioned earlier that the RTF template was very, very cool and very well laid out with lots of graphics and headers and repeating sections and well laid out tables. Study that template for tips and tricks and get your own ideas for how to make a really nice RTF template. And then finally, I had to say it because we had an article about this last week, is I don't particularly like the signature control that's provided with OPM. I think it's pretty limited. So we've been playing with the idea of making a new signature control. So go ahead and play with that and see if you can embed it into the interview. Because it can do some cool stuff. So those are the things that you can do with this massively entertaining and massively useful project. I hope this has been useful to you. Hope you enjoyed reading the articles, and see you again soon.